Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, an anti-government sit-in in Khartoum continues for a fifth day Wednesday. The authorities say half a dozen security forces were amongst the 11 people killed during protests a day earlier. Also, survivors of Cyclone Idai in Mozambique struggle to find enough to eat as the death toll from last month's disaster in southern Africa nears 1,000 between Mozambique and Zimbabwe. And Google inaugurates its first AI research center in Africa. The lab's opened in Accra, an investment that could yield huge rewards for machine learning on the continent and around the world. But first, Sudan's saying that 6 members of the security forces were amongst 11 people killed in Khartoum on Tuesday. Opposition leaders claim that around 20 people, though, have been killed since anti-government protesters first began a sit-in around the defense ministry on Saturday. Demonstrators have been calling for an end to President Omar al-Bashir's 30-year rule. Onka Ula has more.
Sudanese protesters salute soldiers as they patrol the streets of Khartoum, a symbol of the growing understanding between the people and the military. For days, thousands of protesters have been gathering in front of the defense ministry in the Sudanese capital, which also houses the military headquarters. They want to convince soldiers to join them in their calls for President Omar al-Bashir's resignation. At night, the military compound was opened up to give protesters shelter, and witnesses say soldiers protected protesters from security forces. But it seems that's as far as they'll go. A general said on state TV on Tuesday that the military has nothing to do with political matters. But the country's police has been ordered to no longer intervene against the demonstrators. The sit-in is the latest in a series of protests that began last December over the rising cost of food, but quickly morphed into the greatest challenge yet to Bashir's 30-year rule. This week, Western powers have thrown their weight behind protesters for the first time. In a joint statement, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Norway called for a credible political transition plan in Sudan. Despite pressure at home and abroad, Bashir has remained defiant. He's imposed a slew of tough measures, including a nationwide state of emergency, and his ruling party is organizing a rally in support of the embattled leader on Thursday.
Now, the two men at the heart of years of brutal civil war in South Sudan have met at the Vatican for a 2-day retreat aimed at steering their country towards peace. After 5 years of devastating violence, President Salva Kiir and rebel leader and former Vice President Riek Machar were invited by the heads of the Catholic and Protestant churches to try and build confidence in a fragile peace deal which was signed last October.
Praying for peace in an attempt to consolidate their fragile truce and prevent further conflict in South Sudan, the Vatican's hosting a spiritual retreat for bitter rivals President Salva Kiir and rebel leader Riek Machar.
They are political leaders, but they are led by religious leaders in this setting. They will make a commitment to peace after the Holy Father's speech. This shows how religion is at the service of peace.
While the exact program hasn't been made public, the schedule is said to be built around conversation and prayer. South Sudan is a predominantly Christian country. There's a communal dinner held in reflective silence. The participants will be given a Bible, and the Pope will address the group. The two sides signed a power-sharing deal last September and are due to form a unity government this May. But they're lagging behind schedule, and analysts say the country risks fresh conflict. Civil war broke out in South Sudan in 2013, 2 years after the country declared its independence. Following a power struggle between President Salva Kiir and rebel leader and former Vice President Riek Machar. Human rights groups accused both sides of committing war crimes. The fighting was marked by atrocities, including ethnic massacres and rape. At least 400,000 people died, and millions were forced from their homes.
Look now at some news in brief. Human Rights Watch says that Cameroonian security forces have brutalized civilians in the Anglophone regions in the northwest. 5 men were reportedly killed in an attack in Melouf on April 4th. Some of the victims were killed execution style, 1 was beheaded. 3 of the bodies were mutilated. 2 were found with their hands tied, genitals cut off. Soldiers, gendarmes, and members of the elite Rapid Intervention Brigade are accused of being behind the violence. Security forces have also been accused of abusing civilians in a crackdown on a separatist bid from English-speaking communities in the Francophone majority country. The United Nations held a memorial in Addis Ababa on Wednesday to mark the 1 month since the Ethiopia Airlines crash, in which 157 people were killed. The ceremony at the Economic Commission for Africa paid particular tribute to the 21 UN staffers and 12 aid workers who lost their lives when the Boeing 737 MAX went down minutes after taking off from the capital's airport en route to Nairobi. Algeria's interim president set the date for delayed presidential elections for July 4th. Abdelkader Ben Salah was sworn in on Tuesday after Abdelaziz Bouteflika quit last week under pressure of weeks of protests against his 19 years in power. On Wednesday, Algeria's army chief said that he would expect members of the ruling elite, who've also been the focus of popular protests, to be prosecuted for corruption. Zimbabwe said it will exhume and rebury thousands of people massacred between 1983 and 1987. Known as the Gukura Hindu, at least 20,000 people were killed by a crack unit deployed to crush dissidents opposed to then Prime Minister Robert Mugabe's leadership. He was forced out in 2017. Current leader Emmerson Mnangagwa was state security minister at the time of the massacres and supported the campaign. Now, as feared, the death toll from last month's Cyclone Idai is nearing 1,000. At least 344 in Zimbabwe and 602 in Mozambique. Those figures are expected to keep rising. More than 2 million people, most of whom were in Mozambique, were affected by a storm that's been described as being one of the deadliest ever to hit the southern hemisphere. The damage continues as many of those affected struggle to find enough to eat. Clément Bonnereau has the details.
For many, queuing for food has become a daily routine in Mozambique. Virginia Jones says she's been struggling to feed her family.
Until now, I was only eating what my daughters and grandchildren gave me, food that was given to them after their homes were destroyed.
More than 2 million people were affected by Cyclone Idai, which swept across Zimbabwe and Malawi last month and caused the most devastation to Mozambique. There, the city of Beira was almost totally destroyed. Hundreds of lives and hundreds of thousands of homes were lost. Many are now relying on handouts from the UN's World Food Programme.
It's still very difficult, but thank goodness the floodwaters are starting to go down. However, isolated villages, little places remote, miles from anywhere, we've still got lots of problems with the roads and the bridges.
The UN has fed over 700,000 people so far, but says handouts are only a short-term solution. The focus is now on food production, which is at its lowest in decades. That's because Cyclone Idai destroyed hundreds of thousands of hectares of arable land.
They lost all their harvest, all their maize, all their groundnuts, all their cassava. It has been flooded or destroyed by the winds. And then also it has been basically totally wet by the big waters that raise.
Mozambique's government has vowed to provide 1,000 tons of seeds to avoid a long-term food crisis. But the clock's ticking. Experts say farmers only have 2 weeks left to plant new crops before the end of the rainy season.
Well, Google's just inaugurated its first AI research centre in Africa. The lab's opened up in Accra, Ghana, an investment that could yield huge rewards for machine learning on the continent and around the world. Our Nathan Kwao tells us more.
So after months of waiting, Ghana has its first Google AI Research Center, and Africa really has its first Google AI Research Center. Now, to start with, the center will have 10 people drawn from different backgrounds, from academia, from social media, from tech, and from all the other related fields. Now, these 10 people will put their brains and resources together in the areas of marrying AI and apps into great areas like agriculture, healthcare, research, and finding solutions to the problems that afflict not only Ghana, but the rest of or the African continent. Now, this breakthrough will have a lot of tech people really buzzing because the conversation around technology is getting more intense in Ghana and on the continent. And with this huge breakthrough of having Africa's first ever Google AI Research Center, that's where I'm actually speaking from. It will be great for the people in the tech space, and over time, we should see a huge revolution in that area, and also in the area of solving big problems using tech, using app, and using artificial intelligence.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us. Do so again, though, if you can. Take care.